Alright, so welcome to another tutorial for all the Frontier lads and ladettes and everyone in between. We're going to be looking at Worldspace, interior and general cell related shenanigans today. Take this as the most base level tutorial you could possibly imagine. We're going to go into a few different topics, but we're going to try and keep it relatively simple in this video. Try and keep it maybe under 10-15 minutes. So we're going to look at how to open interiors, how to open exteriors. We're going to talk about what those are. We're going to talk about how to place, move, and scale objects. We're going to talk about how to use the object window. And we're going to discuss a few other bits and pieces along the way. So, of course, to get started, we always open up the Data tab and we select the Frontier or whatever else we're doing. Great. So we're going to get that loading and we're going to start it off. Great. So, as with the previous tutorial, we're going to be dragging over the object and the cell window. Now, I'm actually going to be talking about what the two of these windows are this time. So, in the GECK, you have three primary windows. You have the render window, nearly said Wender video, the render window, the object window, and the cell view window. So, we're going to start with the render window. That is a tongue twister. Try and say it multiple times in a row. The render window is where you say, is where you do all of the actual GECK interior placement, exterior placement, basically anything that involves placing objects in the world. Now you can see here I've just loaded up an interior, and to move around in the GECK, you're going to have to learn hotkeys. You're going to have to learn how to use the mouse. So all you really need to know is that holding down the mouse wheel will let you sort of pan a little bit like that. Holding down shift will let you rotate. It will rotate around generally just a random point in space. I don't remember exactly what it rotates around, but you can also get it to occasionally rotate around objects if you're doing that. Regardless, shift and mouse wheel are the two main ones, and so that, and you've got rotate. You can also scroll in with the mouse wheel, and those two are basically the main ways that you will actually move around the GECK. So if I want to go and look at that generator, I'll use my mouse wheel to scroll in. I'll use my shift key to rotate a little bit so I can get it in view. Use my mouse wheel, scroll in. Now I've got the generator in full view. It's really as simple as that. It just takes practice. It takes a long time to get used to. It's the same with really any modeling, any creation tool. You just have to get used to the camera navigation, and it's probably the most fundamental thing that you can do. Great, so we've got that covered. Now let's go back to the object window and the cell view window. So we'll start with the cell view window just because it's inherently a little less complicated than the object window. Up here you have a few settings: Worldspace, X, Y, Go, and a big old list. And then you have another section over here that we'll come to in a minute. Where it says Worldspace, you have the full list of all the world spaces in whatever mod or sets of mods that you are editing. Now, for people who have not used a GECK before, there are two really major sections: interiors and world spaces. World spaces are anything you can wander around in. It's the Mojave, it's the DC, it's the Frontier, it's the Commonwealth, it's the big open spaces that you can wander around in. Interiors are typically singular little interiors, sections that you can enter and walk around in. These tend to be a lot smaller because they're only really designed to house a small amount of content, and they're typically used for filling out a world, adding locations to go for quest givers, and obviously there's a lot of interiors. New Vegas adds about 2 to 300. The Frontier adds over 500, which to date is the most of any mod. But that's looking at interiors. But if we want to look at world spaces, for example, you just have to scroll down and select whatever world space you want. So I'll select the asset test world here. And you will see that it has opened up a new set of things, and everything's just labeled wilderness. That's fine. That's just the standard naming convention for any cell that doesn't have a specific editor ID. So if we want to go to this asset test world, all we have to do is double click, left click on that, and here we go. We're now in the asset world. And to obviously move around, you just scroll around, zoom in, zoom out with mouse wheel, shift to rotate around, pan with the mouse wheel. Really, really easy. Moving around in interior and exterior cells are different, however. In interior cells, everything is loaded at once, which means that all of the objects in the cell can be interacted with at the same point. Exterior cells are different, and exterior world spaces are different because they're inherently a lot larger. So to get around moving in world spaces, all you really need to do is sort of keep zooming in, and you'll see that it loads extra cells. The number of cells that it loads is determined by a value known as U-grids. We do not change the U-grids value, and it's typically set at 9, which is more than enough for pretty much anything you're doing. If you have a slow or weak PC, you can decrease that and it will help performance quite a lot, especially in more intensive world spaces like the Frontier. Now you'll note if you try and load the Frontier's world space, you have a lot more cells and it takes a lot longer to load. That's just inherently because of how big the Frontier is. So if we want to go to TF Big Hangar, we'll right click and load it all up. Great. So now we're in the Frontier just outside of the NCR airport. And same as it was in the asset test world, you can move around with the scroll wheel. Do be careful, however, moving in big world spaces like the Frontiers can cause you to run out of memory after a while, and you will crash because the GECK does not remove the memory as you are moving around the world space as the game does, which we are looking into, but at the moment it means that you will crash after a while. That being said, the next hotkey you need to memorize is the F5 key. The F5 key will refresh the entire scene, and you'll see down here it says loading again. Now it has refreshed the scene. What this does is it clears out all of the memory that's currently held by the GECK, and it'll allow you to keep working and keep moving around. I'll get to why the F5 key is also important later when dealing with interiors, less so for exteriors, but it certainly helps with performance management. For general movement in the world space, let's just go to the skids. We're going to learn how to just move and place some items. For the start, let's just learn how to move some items. Let's check this car here. Left click it and you will see that a bounding box has appeared around the car. You can now simply hold left click to move it around in a space. Now it will typically only move horizontally like this. If you want to move it on different axes, Z is up and down, X is on the X direction, Y is on the Y direction. You'll need to learn how to use those for better positioning, but for the most part, just moving around with the left mouse button and the up and down with the Z key is what you'll use most of the time. For rotating objects, it's really easy. Hold right click and rotate, and it will rotate in whatever direction you sort of spin your mouse. Really, really easy. If you want to drop an object to the floor, say this car is now floating, press F. That will drop the object to the floor. If you want to raise it up a bit, press G. Now you'll notice that as opposed to the F key, the G sort of moves it up in increments. That is because it doesn't have anywhere to sort of snap it up to, because you obviously just go into the sky there. But if you press F, it will once again drop down. If you want to scale an object, make an object bigger or smaller, hold S and drag it in or out. Now, depending on whether you're in an interior or exterior, or depending on some different nifs, you may find that it is a little bit more difficult to scale objects because it's not scaling in real time. All you have to do is let go of the mouse and it will scale properly, just like that. So if we want to make a really big car, it's easy as that. Obviously, we want to keep things pretty reasonable, so we'll leave it at that. If we want to make more precise movements and precise corrections to our objects in the world, we can double click on them. This will open the reference window. This is where all of the per object notes and data will be stored. So for stuff like this car, we've got the scale, which, as we can see, because we scaled it, it is set to something different. It should always usually be 1. So we'll scale it back, and now our car is at the right scale again. And we can rotate here and position as we want. You can also set these little values in the boxes here to any value you want. So say if you want to do it by 90 degrees, just set 90 and it will now rotate by 90 degrees, which is very handy. Special render and pretty much everything else here, for most part, you won't be using until you do more complex stuff. So that's a reference window. To give a bit of an overview of what the different objects in the GECK are, we should probably go over some basic terminology. In the game, there is a number of different types of things that exist in a world. There is a base object, which is, say for example, this car. This car is a static. A static is an object that doesn't move. It just sits there, doesn't do anything special. It's just a mesh that sits in the world. A static is what is known as a base object or a base form. This car that is placed in the world is known as a reference to the base form. Anytime we want to create a new car, we can drag an object from the render window. That is that car, and it will be placed as a new reference. So if you understand that, that's basically the major principles of understanding the difference between what a base form is and a reference. Now, say we wanted to duplicate an object, as we often do when doing more intense interior design. So let's duplicate this Nuka-Cola truck. Press Ctrl and D, and you can move it around just like that. In the game, there is something known as Havoc. Havoc is just a fancy word for the physics of the engine. Some objects in the game have physics enabled, which means that when you bump into them, move them, or interact with them, they will move. This car is what is known as a miscellaneous item. It has physics. It can be picked up by the player. If we want to give this object some physics so we can place it perhaps a little bit more realistically than we could place it by hand, you'll note up in the top bar up here, you'll see a little button that says HK. When you have that object selected, press the HK button. You'll see it's dropped down and placed a little bit more realistically. Say we want to place it on the ground there. Boom, just like that. This is very handy for when you're doing stuff like placing lots of tin cans and little bits and pieces of clutter that we may not want to necessarily place all by hand. This makes it very easy to place them realistically as you would have it in a real scene. So that's the basics of working in the render window. Let's talk about the object window, which is the second most important window in the game, only second to the render window. This thing, it's huge. It looks big because I've got it expanded out, but yours might look something like this. I'll keep mine expanded out just for the sake of it. The object window is basically a list of every possible item and object and thing in the game. It's where you add new items, it's where you delete items, it's where you edit things. It's the whole 9 yards. There is a lot of different tabs and sections here. But if you're just getting started, the main things you're going to want to check out are what we call world objects. Now, world objects are just things that we place into the world, and they're typically things we don't interact with a notable exception, of course, of a few of the things up the top. So we're going to look at statics first, because as I've said already, statics are just objects that don't move or do anything. To drag an object into the render window, all you need to do is select it, hold your left mouse button, and drag and drop. Just like that. Now, because we had Havoc on, that object was placed realistically into the world. If we turned Havoc off and tried to place the same window, you'll see that it just floats in the air. And it will float pretty much in front of the camera wherever you place it. If that's all you want to learn, that's pretty much as far as you need to go for doing all of this stuff. That's how you place objects. Now, if you want to place stuff like a weapon, you would need to look under the Items tab. The Items tab is just near the top. I will condense a few of these for you just to make it easier. But if we go down to Items, Weapon, we can really easily place any object, or weapon rather, that we want. So say we wanted to place, automatic rifle. There we go. We now have an automatic rifle in the world, and we can place that on the ground with F, as we learnt before, and you'll see we have a lovely little automatic rifle in the world. If you want to create a new object, a static, a weapon, really anything, right click. Right click will bring up a context menu that shows you a number of different options: new, edit, delete, and preview. If you want to preview an object, say you want to know what you're actually placing in the world before you place it, hit the preview button. Now, because we selected something that doesn't actually have any model, of course it's not going to show anything, but let's select something else. Let's select the tomahawk. So it will show this lovely little window here that has a big old ground plane. You can get rid of this ground plane by pressing G on your keyboard, which makes it a little easier to view the objects. Now we've got this tomahawk here, really easy. Same controls as the render window to view the objects. This is a great way to actually preview what you're going to place in the world before you place it, which is the entire purpose of this window. And of course we can run a Havoc sim just to test that it has Havoc. Simple as that. New, edit, and delete are pretty self-explanatory. So say we wanted to create a new static, we'll hit right click, new, and there you name a few different things. ID is the name of the object that you want to create. Because we are working in the Frontier development environment, we want to prefix everything with TF, which is TF. As simple as that. So we want to do something like TF new object. Just as easy as that. So you've got your ID, you've got a number of options here, but for the most part you can ignore all of these for static objects unless you've been asked to play with them. Model, you click edit, and it will give you a file viewing window that you can select things on, and when you select something in the file window, it will show up in the model data viewer here. Once you've got that, it's really easy. Just click OK again, and if we go up to our new object, I've sorted by form ID here. That's another tip. If you want to sort by the objects in the lowest in the list mod, which will for us always be the Frontier, just click the little button up here and it will sort by form ID. Because these are the newest items added to the Frontier, they will be at the top of the list. And you can see our TF new object has been appeared and added to the list. If we want to drag it in, boom. Just like that, we have our house in the world, and of course we can just drag it around, move it and place it how we want. Now you may find sometimes that you aren't able to drag and drop objects into exterior world spaces. This can happen sometimes. The best option is to try and disable the render movement. So the little button up here that has an orange and red square, click that, and you should be able to drag stuff in and drop them Normally, in an interior, this won't happen, so dragging and dropping items will work as they should. What else should I teach you guys? That should be pretty much everything that you need to know to really get started. The major objects you'll be dealing with in the object window will be statics, movable statics, containers. Containers are just things that hold items, so a stove or a fridge. And then items up here, stuff like misc items, weapons, ammo, all that lovely stuff. That should be pretty much everything I need to tell you guys to sort of get started with moving and placing objects in the GECK. If you have any questions, of course, direct them to me or anyone else in the team chats. But for now, thanks guys, and of course, good luck.